Welcome, everybody. Today we are dealing with a really serious and frankly very sad topic.
Yes, it is.
We need to look closely at the recent catastrophic flood disaster in Nepal, specifically the one that recently devastated the Rasua district.
Right.
And the objective for our discussion today is to kind of look past the immediate shock of the global headlines and unpack exactly what happened here. We need to understand the physical mechanics of this crisis and, what the accounts on the ground are truly telling us.
Yeah, to really grasp the scale of the human tragedy here, we have to start with the origin of the flood itself, because the mechanics of it defy what a lot of people usually associate with flooding in this specific region.
Right, because this wasn't just like prolonged monsoon rain. Right?
Exactly. It wasn't seasonal rain swelling a river over several days. The trigger was actually a rapid, high-altitude cascade.
Mm.
And it started across the border in Tibet, high up on the northern face of Langtang Lirum.
And when you look at the topological data for Langtang Liring, I mean, the sheer elevation is almost hard to wrap your head around.
It is.
It's an environment completely hostile to human life, just sitting miles above these communities.
Yeah, the peak is 7,200 meters high.
Wow.
And at that altitude, you're dealing with immense hanging glaciers. So what the satellite imagery and the seismic data reveal is that a massive section of glacial ice and rock high up on that face just suddenly destabilized.
It just gave way.
It gave way. And early reports from distant monitors actually speculated that a localized earthquake triggered it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but the truth is much more terrifying. Millions of cubic meters of this frozen material plummeted down the mountain with such violent momentum that the impact of the collapse created its own seismic shockwave.
So the mountain breaking apart literally masqueraded as a tectonic event on the sensors.
Yes, the energy release is totally comparable. So all of that material, millions of tons of mountain, plunged down the face and slammed directly into the Lenda River basin in Tibet.
Okay, so it hits the river.
Right. A fast-flowing river suddenly had millions of tons of debris dumped right into its channel. And this created a massive, highly unstable natural dam.
Because the water has nowhere to go.
Exactly. The pressure began building exponentially behind this barrier made of just loose rock and ice. And minutes later, the structural integrity of that temporary dam failed catastrophically.
And when it failed, I mean, the river didn't just return to normal flow.
No, not at all.
The surge that came roaring downstream into Nepal's Botkoshi and Trishuli rivers was this violent slurry of water, mud, and heavy debris. The ground data shows that in some downstream sections, the water level spiked by 27 feet.
9 meters.
9 meters, yeah.
In just 30 minutes.
And that 30-minute timeline. That is the crucial metric for understanding the devastation here. The velocity of a debris flow moving down a steep gradient like that means downstream communities were stripped of the one thing they needed most.
Time.
Time.
Yeah.
Exactly. To really comprehend what that means for a human being on the ground, you have to visualize the reality of these areas. Think about a deep, really picturesque valley. You have rural settlements running alongside the river floor, small farms, a larger town like Timur or Sabrubesi with a bridge connecting the steep forested walls.
Yeah.
People are just going about their daily routines. And then there's a noise. A low, strange thunder echoing down the canyon.
Which is hard to place at first.
Right. At first, it's so low, it hardly seems worth reacting to. Maybe a few phones ping with automated warnings. Then you hear shouts from people positioned higher up the slopes, yelling to move up the hills. And initially, there's just confusion.
Well, yeah, because the auditory warning of something on this scale is completely foreign.
Right.
Even if you've lived by a river your entire life, the sound of a million tons of debris grinding its way down a canyon, it doesn't immediately register as water.
No. So people are calling back, asking what's going on. The shouts to run get fiercer, more frantic. A few people with a vantage point looking up the valley see a gush of river water rising. It looks different, it's muddy, but maybe not instantly lethal.
But then it changes.
It does. The water surges up the valley walls, turning this dark, churning color. It's like the old ancestral tales of what the mountains can do are suddenly unfolding in real life.
And the physics of a high-density slurry make it far more destructive than standard floodwater. It acts like a scouring pad on the landscape.
Oh, wow.
As it rushes down the valley, it picks up boulders, entire trees, layers of topsoil. It grows in mass and kinetic energy with every single mile, turning into this highly abrasive, destructive force.
So it's growing in size and getting darker as it churns up the earth. People are running up the hills, scrambling up whatever small trails lead up the valley walls, and they look back and see a strange haze engulfing the area as the wall of water arrives.
Yeah, that mist.
And the mist from the churning water actually gives a false sense of hope to some as they run, making them think maybe the worst has passed, maybe it's just a spray. But then the deadly, dense floodwater comes crashing around the valley curve.
It's terrifying.
People are clambering directly over boulders and undergrowth just to gain any vertical distance. And when they finally look back, the village below just vanishes in seconds.
It literally wipes the geography off the map. A slurry of that density destroys critical infrastructure purely on impact. Major hydropower plants, bridges, local police stations, banks, family homes, they're all shattered and swept away as if they're made of paper.
Just gone.
The sheer kinetic force leaves nothing behind but scoured bedrock.
And survivors trapped on the ridges were calling out, screaming in terror as they watched entire families and homes erased in minutes. It wasn't a river overflowing, it was like a mountain unzipping and dropping a 27-foot wall of heavy, churning concrete directly onto a community. And what makes this modern tragedy so deeply unsettling is the contrast between that visceral, localized horror and the digital world. The speed of the water was matched only by the speed at which this tragedy was broadcast globally.
We have crucial observations on this from David Ways, a Nepal guidebook author who tracked how this unfolded online.
Yeah.
Because we live in an era dominated by smartphones and satellite networks, the disaster played out across global screens in near real time.
Right.
He noted the heartbreaking primary footage, so the raw videos recorded by local residents trapped on those high ridges, showing the riverside villages engulfed while onlookers wept.
Yeah.
But the secondary cycle that instantly followed is a glaring indictment of our modern media ecosystem.
Because within hours of those raw primary clips circulating, viral aggregator pages and clickbait creators descended on the footage.
Absolutely.
They began repackaging the raw videos using AI overlays, adding sensationalized digital thumbnails, inserting exaggerated visual and audio effects.
Because the underlying mechanism of these platforms rewards shock value and engagement over verified reporting. An algorithm doesn't care about the dignity of the victims.
No, it doesn't.
A 10-second clip of a bridge collapsing with an AI-generated siren sound will get millions of views, and that generates ad revenue for a page sitting halfway across the world.
Which is an entirely exploitative economy built on top of a tragedy. And almost simultaneously, unverified crowdfunding accounts began proliferating across these same platforms, soliciting private donations from viewers who are emotionally manipulated by the sensationalized clips.
Right.
Which brings up a tension we have to acknowledge. On one hand, global connectivity means the world knows about a crisis instantly. But on the other hand, did this real-time broadcasting actually help the victims, or did it just create a grotesque new economy of exploitation?
That's a vital question.
Anyone who covered the aftermath of the 2015 Nepal earthquake knows this digital pattern raises massive red flags for the actual victims.
Yeah, the 2015 earthquake serves as a really grim historical precedent here. Following that disaster, hundreds of millions of dollars in untracked international donations flowed into private, unverified online channels fueled by viral disaster footage.
And where did it go?
Well, the harsh reality of that financial influx is that much of the money just evaporated into administrative costs, unregulated NGOs, or completely unaccounted schemes.
Wow.
The actual rural victims whose homes were destroyed were left entirely stranded without long-term rebuilding support, while the digital economy simply moved on to the next trending event.
And this exploitative media cycle wasn't just farming views and intercepting unverified donations. It was also fundamentally misreporting who was actually dying and trapped in this disaster.
Yes, that was a huge issue.
The global media coverage had a glaring cultural and operational blind spot. Major news outlets repeatedly broadcasted that hundreds of, quote, foreign trekkers were missing near the border.
And that framing completely overwrites the vital local reality of the situation. The official documents and ground accounts correct the record entirely. The timing of this disaster coincided directly with the peak sacred season for the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra.
Okay.
This is a profound, highly organized spiritual pilgrimage that crosses the border at Rasuagati.
So these were not recreational tourists out for a hike on a mountain trail with backpacks.
Not at all. The vast majority of the individuals stranded or out of contact along the Rasua corridor were devout Kailash Yatris. They travel primarily in organized bus and jeep convoys along paved transit highways.
Right.
They're moving between border posts, guest houses, and immigration centers. Their exposure to the flood was not because they were lost in the wilderness. It was because the paved, modern transit infrastructure they were utilizing was physically annihilated by the debris flow.
And culturally, the demographic of these pilgrims is completely different from the Western trekker trope the media defaulted to.
Yeah. Exactly. A very high percentage of these pilgrims hold non-resident Indian status, or they travel on passports in the global South Asian diaspora. And they are accompanied by local Nepali drivers, guides, and support crews.
Right.
When distant newsrooms hear Nepal and immediately default to the lazy trope of foreign trekkers in danger, they completely ignore the massive cultural and religious reality of the region.
It strips the victims of their actual identities. Distant observers failing to understand the people involved is frustrating, but it points to an even deeper, more systemic failure to understand the changing landscape itself.
Yes.
Because this disaster along the Butkoshi is not a freak isolated incident. The geological data paints a picture of an accelerating systemic shift across the entire high Himalayan arc.
We can trace this directly to another disaster that occurred very recently. In August 2024, a devastating flash flood hit the village of Thame in the Solukhumbu district. Thame sits roughly 100 kilometers to the east of the Rasua district, located in an entirely different river basin. Yet the underlying physical mechanisms driving the destruction in both locations are identical.
I was looking at the reports on the Thame flood, and the sequence of events is chillingly similar to what just happened in Rasua.
It is. In the Thame event, a massive rock and ice avalanche broke away from the high frozen peaks. It crashed directly into an upper glacial lake named Upper Goli Cho. The kinetic force of that avalanche hitting the water created a massive displacement wave that overtopped a natural moraine dam.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the geology here, a moraine dam isn't a solid concrete structure.
No, definitely not.
It's essentially a fragile natural bowl made of loose rocks, dirt, and ice left behind by a retreating glacier. So when a massive wave hits it, it doesn't just act like a bathtub overflowing.
It crumbles. The wave punches a hole right through that loose perimeter, allowing the entire lake to drain catastrophically.
Unbelievable.
In Thame, that breach triggered a cascade outburst into lower lakes, and the resulting flood wiped out half the village. Subsequent scientific research conducted by ICEMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and Nepal's National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority revealed that this threat is far from localized.
Right. There are more of these lakes.
Yes. Several highly unstable glacial lakes, including Rindi Cho and Homi Cho, remain sitting directly above Thame, threatening a repeat disaster.
And the ICEMOD researchers specifically classified Rindicho as an extreme hazard.
Yeah.
And the physical reason why is what makes this so deeply concerning for the future of the entire region.
Right. The hanging glaciers situated directly above the water face of Rindi Cho are actively thawing due to rising global temperatures.
Yeah.
As that ancient ice melts, it is actively weakening the permafrost, which is the frozen ground that is quite literally holding the mountain walls together.
It is as if the structural glue holding the entire Himalayan arc together is simply melting away. These aren't theoretical climate warnings for 50 years in the future. They are a tragic new baseline. The mountains themselves are actively losing their structural integrity.
The catastrophe along the Butkoshi proves that these high-altitude cascade failures are not anomalies. They are becoming frequent occurrences as the underlying thermal dynamics of the mountains change.
So if the structural integrity of the mountains is failing, the immediate question is how to protect the people living beneath them.
Right.
It's incredibly easy for commentators sitting safely in distant, flat countries to ask, well, why not just install automated warning sirens? Or why don't they just move the towns away from the rivers? But the physical reality of Himalayan geography absolutely defies those simple textbook fixes.
It really does. The harsh realities of narrow mountain valleys make standard early warning solutions incredibly inadequate. Automated sensor networks and warning sirens are valuable for detecting anomalies, sure, but they are not a silver bullet.
Because of the speed.
Exactly. You have to factor in the flash flood velocity we discussed earlier. The Butkoshi surge reached downstream settlements in under 30 minutes.
30 minutes from the moment of a collapse at 7,200 meters to a wall of concrete hitting a town. Even if a sensor works perfectly and a siren goes off instantly, a 30-minute window is terrifyingly short.
And during that narrow window, you encounter the second harsh reality, which is severe evacuation bottlenecks. Think about the logistics of moving a rural population.
Right.
You have 15 minutes of confusion, leaving you 15 minutes to act. In that time, you are trying to mobilize elderly residents, carry young children, and corral the essential livestock that represents a family's entire livelihood.
And moving them there.
Exactly. You have to move all of them up steep, highly unstable valley slopes covered in loose mud and undergrowth. Executing that evacuation in a 15-minute window is logistically nearly impossible.
Which brings up the other common simplistic suggestion from outsiders, which is relocation. People ask why these communities don't just abandon the valley floors and rebuild on higher, safer ground.
But human settlements have thrived along these river floors for centuries for essential, practical reasons. The rivers provide crucial drinking water. They irrigate the arable land needed for farming, which is incredibly scarce in the high mountains.
Yeah, you can't just farm anywhere.
Right. Furthermore, the valleys serve as the primary commerce and transit routes. Relocating entire populations away from their economic and agricultural lifeblood introduces massive, often insurmountable logistical and economic challenges. You cannot simply build a thriving agricultural and trading hub on a 45-degree mountain slope.
No, you can't. So, with prevention and early warnings fundamentally compromised by the sheer physics of the geography, we have to look at what happens after the disaster. The initial shock inevitably fades from the global news cycle. The viral videos start generating clicks, and then the long, agonizing process of recovery begins on the ground.
And that recovery phase introduces a whole new set of immense legal and logistical nightmares. The reality of relief is far more complicated than sending shipping containers full of supplies.
Right.
When communities attempt to rebuild, local authorities often run into significant legal roadblocks. A vast number of the destroyed riverside structures lacked formal land permits.
And if you're listening to this from a city where every single building has a registered zoning permit on file, it might seem crazy that aid can't be easily distributed, but we have to remember the ancestral nature of these valleys.
Exactly.
These are settlements that have organically expanded over generations, long before modern bureaucratic paperwork existed.
And when that legal ambiguity meets total physical destruction, the mechanisms for official, state-sponsored rebuilding aid can completely stall. Bureaucracy gridlocks the recovery. Without a formal permit proving ownership of a specific plot of land, government funds or large-scale institutional aid cannot be legally dispersed to rebuild a family's home. The result is that villagers are left in a state of prolonged displacement, living in temporary shelters for years while the paperwork remains in limbo.
It is a heartbreaking reality to comprehend. You survive a mountain literally collapsing onto your town, you lose your livelihood, and then you are trapped in a bureaucratic purgatory because you didn't have a modern piece of paper for a home your family might have inhabited for a century.
This systemic gridlock highlights a desperate need for a paradigm shift in how we handle mountain disasters. Finding lasting solutions requires moving far beyond reactive short-term disaster relief.
Yeah.
It demands long-term infrastructure planning that explicitly accounts for thawing permafrost and changing river dynamics. It requires accurate, ground truth reporting that centers the actual victims. It necessitates transparent, accountable funding mechanisms to bypass bureaucratic hurdles, and it requires clear international cooperation rather than ad hoc, unverified crowdfunding that disappears into the digital ether.
As search operations continue in the Rasuwa district and technical investigations proceed, we have to acknowledge the folks doing the grueling necessary work right now. We want to state clearly that the Nepal Red Cross are doing great work on the immediate ground for this disaster as it unfolds.
They absolutely are.
And we want to note explicitly, while we are not asking nor requesting donations for any one organization today, we want to put out a steady reminder that there will be some looking for private donations online, and listeners should choose very carefully to ensure their support actually reaches the valley floor.
Caution and verification are paramount. The lessons of 2015 must be rigorously applied to ensure aid bypasses the digital exploiters and actually reaches the communities who have lost absolutely everything.
As we close out today's discussion, I want to leave you with a lingering, unresolved question. It is something we all need to deeply grapple with as we watch these environmental shifts accelerate. With global temperatures rising and the structural glue of the mountains themselves actively thawing, what does the future hold for human settlements across the globe that have thrived alongside rivers for centuries when the very geography that gave them life suddenly turns into a weapon against them?